The more mentoring I do, I see two things primarily that hold people back from accomplishing more. First is fear, and that's usually rooted in poor self esteem or poor self image. So, how do you fix that? Well, the first thing you do is you do things that scare yourself, and eventually you won't be afraid of them like you were in the beginning. Cold call is a good example of that. When I talk to people about cold calling, they say that it's terrifying to them. I had one guy this week that say that he froze. It was like a nuclear shock to his system. Usually it's not that bad, but it's outside your comfort zone for most people. So there's a couple things you can do. One is, if you have not already, I'd encourage you to read Release Your Brakes by James Newman about comfort zone. Really, really helpful. There are exercises in there. I would encourage you to do those exercises. A lot of people say to me, it was so emotional for me, I had to put it down and pick it back up. So that will help you. But there's no substitute for doing the things that scare you. And most of the time, your anticipation of the event is far worse than the actual event. You know, think back to public speaking. When you first started that in school, maybe you probably for a month ahead were thinking about, well, what's it going to be like? And what if I mess up, et cetera, et cetera. Then you end up doing your 5-minute talk, and it usually turns out a whole lot better than you thought. So that's the first thing. Work on your self-image, work on your self-esteem, and the way to do that certainly is to work the things that scare you, and then again, spend some time with Release Your Brakes by James Newman. I think that would really help you. The second thing is simple. The second thing is simple to understand, but for a lot of people, they don't do it, and that is taking action, kissing a lot of frogs. And there's no substitute for making the calls, sending the letters, sending the emails, contacting people. And it's interesting, this past week, in the groups that I ran, I said, set a goal for the following week. How many calls you want to make? The most was 280 in a week. The least was 5 calls. And it was interesting to look at that. The person that said 5 calls, I said that if you take that over a year, that's, let's just say 50 to make the math easy, 5 a day, 5 a week times 50 weeks, 250 calls. And we had someone who said they were going to make 280 calls in a week. So it would take you, with that output, a year to do what someone's going to do presumably in a week. That wasn't lost on me, and hopefully not lost on you as well. Well, how do you do that? Set a number for yourself. Whether that's sending emails, sending LinkedIn messages, cold calling, having discussions, but ultimately it comes down to having discussions, whether that's a prospect, a board member, a lawyer that you're interviewing, an accountant, whatever it is. So ultimately it comes down to those discussions. So if I were going to say, well, how do you manage that? Set a goal for a week, set a goal for a day, and then every night, planning the next day, go and say, okay, I want to talk to 5 people, 10 people, 50 people, whatever the number is. Write down those names and write down the time that you're going to call them. And if it's a call, you can put the phone number. If it's a Zoom call, you probably won't have to put the link down. You'll have that somewhere. But if that's 10 or 20 or whatever number it is, write those down, and you will have, and what time you want to call, and you will have a much, much better chance of accomplishing that than if you don't. So I would encourage you to do those things. Remember, everybody is afraid when they begin. You will get better, and you will have a hard time remembering back to the days when, wow, that used to scare me, and it doesn't anymore. Most people are terrified of big hitter calls, and when they've done a bunch of them, they say, you know, those were actually the easiest calls that I did. And I bet you'll have that same experience. And then the second is make the calls, track your calls, plan those calls. If you do those 2 things and you do them consistently, and you're working in an industry where your plan is good, you've got plenty of prospects, more than likely some good things are going to happen to you.